Hey guys, so I thought it would be a good idea today to do a video on tips for beginner gardeners. So if you are new to gardening, you've only had maybe only like a year of experience under your belt or even no experience at all, I figured it would be a good video to make today. So I've got my little list right here of things that I wanted to talk about because there's a lot. The first thing I wanted to talk about was my own experience about me. My name is Madison and I live in southern Indiana. My hardiness zone is, I think, 6B. I'll actually check just to make sure. Okay, so I'm in hardiness zone 6A in southern Indiana. And my last expected frost date for the year is the 25th of April. So that kind of gives you an idea of my location, where I'm at with my seeds and being able to plant and not plant things. So I wanted to talk about how I started gardening. So this is my second year as a gardener. My second year putting things into the dirt, I should say, because I actually have 3 years of seedling experience, including this year. My first year sowing seeds, I actually ended up killing like all of them because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't do any research on it, and all of my seedlings pretty much died before I even got them in the ground, and then I gave up and just didn't re-sow them or anything like that. And then last year, the 2019 spring growing season, I did have a lot of failures last year as well. I put things out too early and they died. And I left things out in the rain and they drowned, or they developed fungus and algae and things like that. So I did have a lot of failures last year, but I think that failure is good, especially when it comes to gardening, because if you don't have any failures, then you don't really learn anything. In my personal opinion, failures are good because they make you a better gardener and you learn from them. Looks like my battery's about to die, but I guess I'll keep going until my battery dies. So the first tip, the first thing I want to talk about is seed starting. So I want to give you guys tips on seed starting, things that I messed up on when I first started. So the first thing I wrote down is you need to figure out your frost dates. So there's a window where you can start sowing seeds before your last frost date so that they're ready to plant in the ground when your frost date passes. So you can start sowing things 2 to 6 weeks before your last frost date so that they're growing in the greenhouse or wherever you have them at, under a grow light, whatever, before you can transplant them out into the garden. And you definitely want to keep a look at your frost dates. There are some things that are frost tolerant that you can plant out in your garden before your last frost date, things like kale, onions, potatoes, a lot of lettuces and things you can plant out in the garden, and they can withstand a frost or two and they'll be perfectly fine. But things like peppers and tomatoes, you really don't want to plant out before your last frost date comes, because they will die. And then I wanted to talk about direct sowing versus seed starting. So there are things that you can direct sow into the ground that are better off being direct sowed, especially things like your root crops like carrots and potatoes and onions. Most of the time it's better to just direct sow those into the ground, because you can't really transplant carrots and things like that, because they really just grow from the root. There are also things like zucchini and squashes and really fast growing things that people like to just direct sow. I personally like to seed start those and then sow them out in the garden. It's really just preference on those type of things. And I do sow some onions, and I also direct sow some of them. So I do have some onions over here. I'll show you them. I have some onions started here that I can transplant out into the garden, but a lot of people like to just direct sow them, and I did start some over in the garden already. And then you also want to decide what things you actually want to plant for your zone. So some people have a longer growing season for warm weather crops, and some people have a longer growing season for cold weather crops. It just depends on where you are in the world. My summer is usually like 3 to 4 months long, so we have quite a long summer. We have a pretty long growing season here. We do have a long winter as well. It's kind of just like a balance of both. Our spring goes by really quick and our fall goes by really quick, so we really just have that long summer and then that long winter. And now I want to talk about seed starting. So what I do with seed starting is I will find these trays. Here. I use these big trays, plastic trays, and they have these little parts that come out, and you can just put the water in the bottom of the tray, and it makes it so much easier to water them because you kind of just put the water in the bottom and they'll soak up the water from their roots versus watering from the top, and that helps minimize damage to the seedlings. I really like these to start seeds, and I reuse them every year. And if you're looking to be more eco-friendly, they also have these biodegradable ones that I know a lot of gardeners don't like them because they kind of fall apart really easy. This was one solid piece, but it's already starting to fall apart, as you can see. And you can actually just plant this whole thing in the ground and it will biodegrade around the plant. So I did try one of these this year. You can also use a lot of other things if you're trying to... Okay, sorry guys, my battery died and I had to change it out. But what I was saying is there are a lot of other things that you can use to be eco-friendly in your garden, but I'm going to talk about that in a different video, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to do a whole video on eco-friendly gardening and stuff like that. But right now we're talking about beginner's tips for gardening. So let's see, where was I? Oh, I was talking about seed starting. So I really like these trays for seed starting, and I want to show you what I use to start my seeds. I really like to use some sort of organic seed starter mix. So I have this one. This is the Jiffy Natural and Organic Seed Starting Mix. And a lot of these use things like coconut coir and a lot of other organic materials in here, so it's really good for your seedlings. So this is all I use to start my seeds. I just put some sort of organic seed starter in here. Actually, I'll show you the one that I actually use. This is just another bag that I bought. This is the one I used this year to start all my seedlings, and this is just my backup bag that I bought. So this one is the Burpee Eco-Friendly Natural and Organic Seed Starting Mix. So this is the one that I actually use for all of these, but any of them work really well, honestly. I think I used this one last year and it worked pretty good. So that's all I do for starting my seedlings, and then you're going to want to put them in some sort of greenhouse or under a grow light. I'll show you guys my greenhouse. If you've watched my other videos, you've seen the greenhouse before, but it's actually right here. It's just this small greenhouse because I don't have a lot of space to work with, so I don't have a really big greenhouse right now, but the one I have works really well for me. So yeah, you're going to want to put them in there. And then I did a whole video on seed rotation and seed thinning because that's also really important when it comes to starting your seedlings. So what I mean by seed rotation is you want to move them around on the shelves, and you also want to turn them around like completely. So if it's facing this way for a couple days, you want to completely rotate it on the shelf to face this way, because what the seedlings are going to do is they're going to want to gravitate towards the sun. So as you can see, these seedlings are all pointing this way. That's because they're reaching out toward the sun that way. And what I want to do is I want to take the seedlings and rotate them around so they reach back this way towards the sun. And what this is going to do is it's just going to make the seedlings a lot stronger and healthier because they're not going to have brittle little stems. So let's see, what's next on my list that I want to talk about. I have to make a list because my brain just jumbles around and then I don't know what I'm talking about. So deciding when to transplant, I already talked about the frost dates and things, so you're definitely going to want to wait for your frost dates before you transplant anything out in the garden that isn't frost hardy. And then as far as transplanting into a bigger pot, I think you're going to want to wait until they have a pretty established root system so that you don't put the plants in shock, and also a few leaves. So I'm going to wait probably another week or two before I transplant this. I think I'm going to direct transplant it into my vertical garden tower, which I'm going to do a whole video on that too, because I want to make a video on small space gardening for people who live in like a city, or maybe only have an apartment balcony or like a front porch or a back porch to work with. I want to do a whole video on that for you guys too. But you want to make sure that you have a pretty established seedling. The roots are established. It has a few leaves poking out on it, just so you're not transplanting it too early and putting it into shock. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about as far as seedlings go is hardening them off. So there definitely is going to be a period where you want to get them used to the brighter sun outside and the colder temperatures outside. You want to kind of harden them off and get them used to all of that so that you don't put them into shock and then they die. So now we're moving into the actual garden, planting things out in the garden or containers or raised beds or whatever you're planting in. So I want to talk about the basic things that you need for plants. So what are the basic things? Soil, sunlight, and water are kind of like the basics that everybody knows what plants need. So the first thing, soil. You want really healthy, nutrient-dense soil. You want it to be loose and well draining. You want it to have good microbes in it, things like worms. You really want kind of maybe 5 to 10 worms per square foot in your garden, and if you see 5 to 10 or even more worms, then you know you have really healthy soil. And when I was digging out my garden earlier, I noticed I had a ton of worms, but I'm still gonna amend the soil because I think we have very clumpy clay-like soil here, and I didn't amend it last year, and I definitely want to amend it this year. So basically you really want soil that's full of life. And what those worms are going to do is they're going to aerate the soil and allow for more water and air to get in. Somebody's making a lot of freaking noise. Anyways, it's going to allow for a lot of air and water to reach the entire root ball of the plant, and it's just going to make for a healthier plant. So clumpy clay-like soil is not good because it retains a lot of water. It doesn't allow a lot of air to flow through the ground. Oh, and then I also want to talk about the chop and drop method. I really want to implement that this year. So instead of cleaning out your entire garden at the end of the year, you really just want to chop your dead plants and drop them where they are. And a lot of leaves and other organic matter, just throw it into the garden and let it sit. This is going to be really good for your soil because it's going to allow those nutrients to absorb back into the soil. Versus if you take it all off, there's nothing being added to the soil unless you physically add it there. So another thing that I wanted to talk about, I add azomite to my soil, or I'm adding it this year, so I don't have experience with this. This is my first year adding it. I've heard a lot of good things about this. It adds a lot of good minerals in here. So let's see what else in here. We have soluble potash or KO2, calcium, magnesium, chlorine, and sodium. So this is supposedly really good for your garden, and I want to try it out this year. It says to use 1 heaping tablespoon per gallon pot, or spread 1 to 2 pounds per 10 square foot and mix into soil. I've also been adding a lot of worm castings to my containers and into the garden, and I'll show you the brand that I use on the worm castings. They're just right over here. I'm doing a lot of container gardening this year. But this is the only brand of worm castings that I've been using, and it's the Wiggle Worm Soil Builder Pure Worm Casting Organic Fertilizer. So I really like using organic stuff. My entire garden is organic. Oh, okay. I don't like using any type of chemicals or bug sprays or weed killers in my garden, just because that stuff kind of can get onto your plants, and then you're ingesting that, and it's not very good for you or your plants. Again, someone's making a lot of noise. Sorry about that. So, and then I wanted to talk about composting. Adding compost to your garden is really good for it. I am actually implementing a composting bin into my garden space this year. I ordered it, it's on the way. It's called a GeoBin, and it's super affordable. So if you guys are worried about the cost of composting, it was only like $30 something. So I'm just gonna round it up to 40. So if you guys can spend $40 and you have a nice backyard composting bin, and it's free nutrients that goes back into your soil, and it helps the environment, because the food waste problem in the United States and around the world. I will definitely do a video about that when I do my composting video, but right now we're talking about tips for beginner gardeners. I like to get sidetracked. So yeah, I'm going to implement that composting bin. So, oh, now we're going to talk about sunlight. We talked about soil. We're going to talk about sunlight. So, deciding where you want to place your garden is really important, and what you want to place in your garden. So, some plants need full sunlight, so you want to make sure that you're putting your garden in a place that's going to get full sunlight, so that those plants can absorb all the nutrients from the sun that they need. Some plants like partial shade better, so you can plant them in an area that gets partial shade. You really just want to do some research on your plants and decide whether they need full sun or partial shade. So that's very important. I think that's really all that's all I needed to talk about with sunlight. So we're going on to water and feeding. So you definitely don't want to overwater your plants, because they can get something called root rot, and it's just basically the roots set in too much water and they start getting rotten, and it kills the plant. So you definitely want to avoid that. Watering also causes things like powdery mildew and other diseases, algae, fungi to grow in your plants that may not be good for them. So definitely you just want to avoid overwatering, and you can also drown your plants by overwatering them. And then you also don't want to underwater them either, because underwatering them, they absolutely aren't getting enough water and nutrients from the water, and they'll die. So I also want to talk about feeding your plants, because it just gives them a nice little boost of nutrients. Some people like to feed their plants every other day, every week, every 2 weeks. Just decide basically what works for you. I preferably want water. I think last year I fed my plants every 2 weeks, and I was using like the Miracle-Gro thing. But this year I'm not using that, because I kind of feel like the Miracle-Gro stuff isn't really that great. What I'm going to use this year is worm tea. So I still haven't got that yet, but I'm going to order it, some worm tea, and use that this year in the garden, and I will definitely give you guys some updates on that. And I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. My list is done. So those are just some basic beginner's tips for you guys who may not know a lot about gardening yet. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful for some of you who are looking to start gardens. I know a lot of people are wanting to start gardens this year because of everything that's going on with the coronavirus and everything. People are scared. They want to start preparing food for their families. They have to live off the garden or whatever. So I hope that this video helps some of you guys out with that. And I'm really excited to welcome these new gardeners into the gardening community. I want to help them out. If you like this video, and subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.